In a moment that will be remembered for years to come, Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados stepped into the political arena with a level of courage and candor rarely seen on the Caribbean stage. The air in the room was thick with tension as she prepared to address a gathering of high-ranking officials, each one acutely aware that something significant was about to unfold. Mottley, known for her unwavering commitment to transparency and justice, was about to make a move that would send shockwaves not just through Guyana, but across the entire region. Her reputation as a fearless leader had preceded her, but even her closest allies could not have anticipated the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. The stakes were high, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, and every whispered conversation fell silent as she took her place at the head of the table. In that charged moment, it was clear that history was about to be made, and that the words spoken here would ripple far beyond these walls. Prime Minister Mia Mottley has just dropped a political bombshell that has, in no uncertain terms, shattered the carefully constructed facade of progress in Guyana. For months, the international community and local citizens alike had been watching Guyana's rapid economic growth, fueled by newfound oil wealth and ambitious development projects. On the surface, it appeared that the country was on a path toward prosperity and stability, but beneath that glossy exterior, troubling signs of corruption and mismanagement had begun to emerge. Whispers of backroom deals, questionable contracts, and the enrichment of a select few at the expense of the many had grown louder. Yet, few dared to speak out publicly, until now. Mottley's intervention was not just a critique, it was a clarion call for accountability, a demand that the truth be brought into the light, no matter how uncomfortable it might be for those in power. Her words cut through the complacency that had allowed these issues to fester, and for the first time, the people of Guyana, and indeed, the wider Caribbean, felt that someone was willing to challenge the status quo. The sense of urgency in her message was unmistakable, and it forced everyone to confront the uncomfortable reality that progress, built on shaky foundations, could not last. Speaking behind closed doors, but with the force and clarity of a public indictment, Prime Minister Mottley confronted the issue of corruption within Guyana's leadership head-on. She did not mince words or hide behind diplomatic niceties. Instead, she laid out a detailed account of the evidence her team had uncovered, evidence that pointed to a pattern of graft and abuse of power at the highest levels of government. Her voice, steady and resolute, cut through the silence as she named names and described the mechanisms by which public funds had been siphoned off for personal gain. The officials in the room listened in stunned silence, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats, others exchanging nervous glances. Mottley's message was clear: the time for turning a blind eye was over. The Caribbean, she insisted, could not afford to let corruption fester unchecked, especially at a moment when the region's future depended on good governance and the equitable distribution of resources. Her words resonated far beyond the walls of that meeting room, echoing through the quarters of power in Georgetown and beyond. For many, it was the first time they had heard such a direct challenge to entrenched interests, and the impact was immediate. Mottley's willingness to speak truth to power inspired not only those present, but also countless others who had long felt voiceless in the face of systemic corruption. The fallout from Mottley's intervention was both immediate and stunning. Within hours of her explosive revelations, the government of Guyana was thrown into turmoil. News of the scandal broke across local and international media, with headlines blaring details of the corruption uncovered and the boldness of Mottley's actions. The public, long suspicious of their leaders but often powerless to demand change, erupted in a mix of outrage and relief. Protests broke out in the streets of Georgetown, with citizens demanding accountability and justice. The pressure on the government became unbearable, and in a dramatic turn of events, a senior PPP minister, one of the key figures implicated in the scandal, was fired. Cameras captured the moment as the disgraced official left the government building, surrounded by a swarm of reporters and flashing cameras. The message was unmistakable: no one, no matter how powerful, was above the law. Mottley's intervention had not only exposed wrongdoing, but it also set a new standard for leadership in the Caribbean. Her actions sent a clear signal to other leaders in the region. The era of impunity was coming to an end, and the people would no longer tolerate corruption in silence. As the dust settled, the region watched closely, wondering what the long-term impact of this seismic event would be. Would it lead to lasting reform, or would the forces of the status quo regroup and resist change? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: Mia Mottley's fearless stand had changed the game forever. In the days that followed, Conversations in homes, offices, and marketplaces across the Caribbean revolved around her boldness and the hope it inspired. For many, her intervention was not just a political act, but a turning point, a moment when the people realized that real change was possible and that the fight for justice and transparency was far from over. The atmosphere in the conference room was electric, thick with anticipation and a hint of unease. All eyes were fixed on Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, as she approached the podium with a determined stride. The room, filled with dignitaries, journalists, and government officials from across the Caribbean, fell silent. Everyone knew that something significant was about to unfold, but few could have predicted the magnitude of what was coming. Mottley's reputation for candor and fearless leadership preceded her, and as she adjusted the microphone, the tension in the air was palpable. This was not just another diplomatic address. This was a moment that would reverberate far beyond the walls of the conference hall. The stakes felt unusually high, and even the most seasoned attendees could sense that history was about to be made. The hum of whispered conversations faded, replaced by a collective breath held in anticipation. With the full leadership of Guyana present, including key ministers and senior advisors, Mottley began her remarks. The expectation in the room was that she would offer warm congratulations to Guyana for its recent oil boom, a discovery that had catapulted the nation into the global spotlight and promised unprecedented economic growth. Many anticipated a speech filled with praise and optimism, perhaps even a call for regional unity in the face of newfound prosperity. The mood was almost celebratory, as if the region was collectively ready to embrace Guyana's success as their own. But as Mottley's words unfolded, it became clear that she had a very different message in mind. She did not offer the expected congratulations. Instead, her tone was measured, her gaze unwavering, as she addressed the assembled officials. The Guyanese delegation shifted in their seats, sensing that this was not going to be a routine celebration. The air grew heavier, and the initial smiles faded as the audience braced for what was to come. Mottley's voice rang out, clear and resolute. "We celebrate the rise of Guyana, but a house built on sand will fall, and I see too many hands in the sand." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was a warning, a call for caution amid the euphoria of newfound wealth. The phrase "too many hands in the sand" was a pointed reference to the growing concerns about transparency, governance, and the potential for corruption in the management of Guyana's oil resources. The audience was visibly taken aback. Some officials exchanged uneasy glances, while others sat in stunned silence, absorbing the gravity of her statement. Mottley's message was unmistakable. Prosperity without accountability is a recipe for disaster, and the eyes of the region and the world were watching. Her words cut through the optimism, reminding everyone that the promise of wealth can quickly become a curse if not managed with integrity and foresight. The silence that followed was not just shock, it was the dawning realization that the future of Guyana, and perhaps the region, hung in the balance. But Mottley was not finished. As the room processed her words, she reached for a thick dossier placed beside her on the podium. She explained that this was not a collection of rumors or unsubstantiated claims from intelligence agencies. Instead, it was a meticulously compiled report, drawn from cross-referenced international procurement and property databases. The dossier contained detailed records of contracts, property acquisitions, and financial transactions linked to key figures in the Guyanese oil sector. Mottley methodically outlined her findings, highlighting discrepancies and patterns that raised serious questions about the allocation of oil revenues and the beneficiaries of lucrative deals. She called for greater transparency, robust oversight, and a commitment to ethical governance, not just for Guyana, but as a standard for the entire Caribbean. Her appeal was not just a critique, but a challenge to all leaders present to rise above short-term gains and set a new precedent for responsible stewardship of natural resources. The impact of her presentation was immediate and profound. The bombshell had been delivered, and its shockwaves would be felt for a long time to come. In that moment, the conference was transformed from a celebration into a reckoning, and the path forward for Guyana and the region would never be the same. The evidence allegedly showed a senior PPP minister's immediate family members were listed as directors of offshore companies that won no-bid contracts for critical oil and gas support services. Instant multi-million-dollar property acquisitions in South Florida and Dubai, by these same family members, inconsistent with declared incomes. In the days leading up to the scandal, a series of banking alerts quietly rippled through financial institutions across several countries. These alerts, filed in jurisdictions far beyond the Caribbean, flagged a pattern of suspicious transactions. The transactions were not just random anomalies, they were directly linked to accounts and entities associated with the minister's political portfolio. Compliance officers, trained to spot irregularities, noticed that the sums involved were unusually large, and the timing of the transfers coincided with key government decisions. As the alerts accumulated, a picture began to emerge. Money was moving in ways that suggested not just carelessness, but intent. The financial world, usually so discreet, was suddenly abuzz with whispers about the Caribbean minister, whose name kept appearing in confidential reports. Some banks even began quietly alerting their own legal teams, bracing for the possibility of international investigations. The sense of unease grew as more institutions realized the scope of the transactions and the potential implications for their own compliance records. It was clear that something significant was unfolding, and that the ripples would soon reach the highest levels of government. When the news finally broke, the reaction was electric. In newsrooms, editors scrambled to verify the details, while government offices were thrown into chaos. Staffers gathered in hushed groups, trying to piece together what this could mean for their administration. In boardrooms and business meetings, executives exchanged worried glances, realizing the potential fallout could be enormous. The sense of urgency was palpable. Phones rang off the hook, emails flew back and forth, and everyone seemed to be waiting for the next shoe to drop. The result was honestly instantaneous. The story dominated headlines, and the public demanded answers. Social media platforms exploded with speculation and outrage, as citizens and commentators alike tried to make sense of the rapidly unfolding events. The scandal became the topic of conversation everywhere, from taxi rides to dinner tables, fueling a sense of collective anxiety about what might come next. The government, caught off guard by the speed and intensity of the reaction, scrambled to regain control of the narrative. Within just 48 hours of a tense private meeting between top officials, the Guyanese government moved swiftly. They announced the resignation of the implicated minister, citing personal reasons in a carefully worded statement. The press conference was tense, with reporters pressing for details that officials refused to give. Cameras captured the minister leaving the government building late at night, his face set in grim determination. The official narrative was that the minister had chosen to step down to avoid being a distraction, but few believed this was the whole story. The speed of the announcement and the lack of detail only fueled speculation. Rumors swirled about what had really happened behind closed doors, and whether more resignations might follow. The government's attempt to project calm only seemed to heighten the sense of crisis, as journalists and political analysts dissected every word of the official statement for hidden meaning. Behind the scenes, the reality was far more dramatic. Insiders later confirmed that this was not a voluntary resignation, but a direct firing orchestrated at the highest levels of government. The goal was clear: contain the scandal before it could spread any further. Prime Minister Mottley's team had presented evidence so compelling that denial was no longer an option. In confidential meetings, senior officials weighed the risks of keeping the minister versus the damage of a public scandal. Ultimately, the evidence was overwhelming. The minister was quietly escorted from his office by security, and a small group of trusted aides worked through the night to manage the fallout. Caribbean newspapers splashed corruption headlines across their front pages, and the government scrambled to reassure the public that swift action had been taken. The message was clear: no one, not even a powerful minister, was above the law. The immediate fallout sent shockwaves through the political establishment, and the story was far from over. In the days that followed, questions lingered about who else might be implicated, and whether the government's response would be enough to restore public trust. The scandal had exposed deep vulnerabilities, and its impact would be felt for months, if not years, to come. Mottley's bombshell was, really, a sovereign act of brutal accountability. She did not just accuse, she provided a forensic roadmap, forcing Guyana's hand. It was a warning that the Caribbean community, under her moral leadership, will not stand by as corruption threatens to turn one nation's historic opportunity into a region-wide disgrace. To understand the seismic shift in Caribbean power dynamics and anti-corruption enforcement this represents, you need the most current analysis. So, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our essential guides and updates.